Okay, so this is part 3 of working through imposter syndrome. So I'm going to start with a bit of a rundown from what we were looking at in the session 2. So we will be looking at that. So let me bear with me. And here we go. All right, so this is what we're going to be covering today. So there's quite a bit of information. Feedback from last week. Now, for people who weren't live in the session, what we were doing last week was tackling that inner critic. So we were thinking about the 3 main thinking errors that occur often when people are suffering from and experiencing imposter syndrome, which is that all or nothing thinking, either it's success or failure, that comparing ourselves with other people and seeing the deficit in us and seeing everything that seems to be going well for that other person and that mismatch between the two. And also the way that we look into the future in a really negative way, so that catastrophizing. So we may sort of just briefly touch on that. Then thinking about how to look into the future and building a sense of value, worth within yourself. This is what I'm going to be emphasizing today, because once we have been able to stop that inner critic voice from being so loud, when we are aware of how that influences how we feel and the actions we take, we have a chance and opportunity to do something differently. But with imposter syndrome, the other part of it is that somehow that ability to sort of internalize the successes or that sense of value can be disrupted, and it can be very difficult. And if it's been something that's there a long time, you have to actively, intentionally work on it to notice what's going well, notice how you're doing things, and building in that value and sense of worth within yourself. Because the problem is when you are looking to others to validate, looking for reassurance all the time, your power and your control is with that other person, people. And you are always then vulnerable to feeling let down or criticized or rejected in some way, not getting what you need, and that can impact on you quite negatively. So that's what the focus of today is. And I thought it might be helpful just to sort of touch on 3 main areas that could be helpful to focus on when you're first starting to sort of try and challenge and change things. So number 1 is that ability to find that inner space, that letting go of the running thoughts and actions, trying to run away from yourself and being with yourself a little bit more, being comfortable in your own skin as it stands. So we're going to just practice a couple of exercises around that. And then the second tip is really how to start to structure a way of noticing what you can do already, the things that you're already competent in, have confidence in, and recognize the skills in yourself. So that ability to keep coming back to that and building on it and noticing more and more what you already can do and what's going well. And finally, a tip around that feeling of failure, that sort of sense of all or nothing, failure concept. So how do we turn the tide on that and think about mistakes as not being mistakes as terrible, awful, but as part of a learning process? So how do we embody that really? Because we can intellectually know it, but not really feel it. And we will try and see whether there's anything that we can do around that. And then I want to just summarize the 3 sessions that we've had, the learning points, and then maybe how to move forward, a little plan of action for that. And I'm encouraging people to maybe give me some feedback on this, because this is the first round of doing this for me. So I just want to know, is it worthwhile? Is it helpful to people? All right. So feeding back from last week. So unfortunately, Amanda, you weren't present in the last one, and the people who were aren't here. So maybe just a reflection time on the last week and thinking about what you've noticed in yourself that might be part of that inner critic that gives you that view of yourself that's putting you down, comparing yourself negatively to others. So have you noticed that turning up? So just a sort of reflection of that. Has that been there for you? Have you noticed that? And if that has, just awareness, okay, you've recognized it. That's the first step in making a change. So we'll just think about that, because I'm always going to be coming back to that. So first tip, and I'm going to encourage you both that are here today to practice this with me in a moment, because when we are recognizing that we are tense, we are feeling anxious, that our mind is running over, we're feeling quite overwhelmed maybe with what we see as a problem, seeing ourselves as maybe being found out or not going to be good enough at the task that's ahead of us, it can lead us to be acting and reacting from that emotional state. And when we're in that emotional state, we're not really paying attention to what's really going on, because we're filtering it through this negative voice in our head and the sensations that we're feeling. So because we're feeling like, oh God, it's all going to go wrong, they're going to see that I'm not going to be competent enough, we are almost focused on that and not able to pay attention to when people are maybe giving us good responses or encouragement, because we're just switched off to that. So the practice I want you to sort of really consider is very simple and straightforward, and some you might practice breathing techniques already, but what I find when I'm working with people who are getting sort of stressed and anxious, it seems to all go out the window when they're in that situation or in that state. So when practicing breathing, my encouragement to people is to do it all day, every day for a while, for a few weeks even, and think about every time you're doing a task at work, when you finish that task, just pause, practice your slow breaths, and then get on to the next task. Because it's so interesting how that changes the dynamic, changes the energy, and gives you a sort of sense of being back in yourself and then open and ready for the next task. So that's what I'd encourage you to sort of think about and try out. It's in the workbook that I'm going to be sending afterwards, so you can see it afterwards and sort of practice. But what I'm going to ask you to do now is, if you can see me, is place one hand on your chest at the top and the other hand just above your belly button, and just take a few breaths in and out. And just notice which hand is moving. Is the top hand moving? Is the bottom hand moving, or are both hands moving slightly? And what I want you to sort of think about is, if the top hand is moving at all, then maybe you're not engaging the diaphragm fully. And that will impact on how the lungs take in the oxygen and release the carbon dioxide. There might be a mismatch between that exchange because the diaphragm's not fully engaged. So in the next few breaths, still putting one hand up on the top of your chest and one just above your belly button, just in the next few breaths, really think about just moving that lower hand so that you are engaging the diaphragm and really aware of how that breath is going in and out. And it's a really good tip for helping that proper diaphragm breathing to occur. And it really does help slow everything down. But that's not the breath work that I want to just practice with you. That's just to help you recognize and engage fully in your breathing. Now what I want you to do, and I'm going to count it with you, is on your next breath in, you're going to breathe in for 3, and then you're going to hold your breath for 3, and then you're going to breathe out for 5. So in your next breath in, you're breathing in for 3, then hold it for 3, and then breathe out for 5. And one more time, breathing in for 3, hold for 3, Breathing out for 5. Okay, and then just bring your breathing back to what's normal rhythm, what's comfortable for you. And I'll just explain that if you don't know what that's doing, that's helping you to focus your attention on your breath, but in a way giving you an action to do. So it takes you out of your head a little bit. But also by breathing out for longer than you breathe in, you're helping that gas exchange to recalibrate. Because when we're breathing from the top of our chest, we're actually taking in too much oxygen in proportion to releasing the carbon dioxide. And that really affects how the brain functions, because the membranes in the brain are very sensitive to carbon dioxide. And any imbalance has a big effect. So slowing the breath down, breathing out for longer, just for a few breaths, can really help manage that. But it's useful that you practice it beforehand. You practice it in your daily life regularly when you're not too stressed, because then you can bring it up and use it when you are feeling a bit tense more easily because it's there. So that's the first tip. That's the practicing the slow breaths, and it's a bit like drinking water. It's something you can do anywhere, and it's so helpful for the body. And that then in turn helps the mind and helps us to get back into the moment. Another really helpful sort of mindfulness exercise that's simple and easy to use is being aware of the five senses. So what we can see, hear, smell, touch, taste. And when we are doing any sort of activity, any mundane activity, when you're in work maybe, or when you're leaving work, going home or going for a walk, practicing this exercise can be really helpful. Just what I can see around me, the colors, what can I hear, what can I smell, what can I touch, and even what can I taste in certain situations. Obviously, when you're out for a walk, it might not be so easy, but you might have something with you that you can put in your mouth and sort of say, yes, I've got this flavor in my mouth whilst I'm looking around me. And that is a way that you can utilize sort of mindfulness, but not be too sort of stuck on trying to be sort of meditation or something that's more structured, that it might feel easy to put it off or delay. Whereas this you can utilize anywhere, and it's really again helpful. And another way of switching off from that overdrive in your mind, because you're asking your mind to be in the present, not thinking about the future, worrying about what's happened already. And the final tip, which I practice with myself, it really helps, is having sort of apps on your phone, like Calm, Headspace I've got, which gives you sort of regular updates and tips and nighttime sort of practices if you're having struggles with sleep. And it just helps again getting that regular routine in place. So the first sort of tip really is the noticing what's going on, getting yourself back to the here and now. And then you can utilize the work we've done in the first 2 sessions, which is noticing your thoughts and then noticing how you're feeling and noticing what actions you're taking, what you might be avoiding. So you're coming from a calmer space and then being more observant of what's actually going on in this situation. And the key thing that we've been looking at is that critical mind. How are you focused on the problem? How you might be attending to that old script of, I'm going to fail, and how awful that's going to be, or what other people are going to think of me. And remember what we did before, which was recognize that thoughts are not facts, that what we say to ourselves doesn't mean it's true about us or the other person. And we have to learn how to navigate that and try to switch our mind from that negative thinking pattern into something more neutral or positive that is going to be more helpful. So once we've really been practicing this for a while, it becomes easy to step back from the thinking and recognize those critical thoughts that aren't very helpful to us. The second tip regarding building our confidence and being more in the moment with what's actually happening rather than our thoughts about what we fear in the future or our ruminations about what's happened before is building a really good, robust sense of our abilities now. So this is a really big area. And like I was saying at the beginning in the introduction, the imposter syndrome really has this quality about it where we just can't seem to hold on to our skills, our values in comparison to other people. We're always undermining, so forgetting or minimizing what we know already, the competence we have in our skills already. It's almost like, I describe to people, it's almost like having a Teflon coat on that things bounce off. They don't get absorbed in, they just go off out again into the ether. So 3 tips to help you notice your skills, build on your strengths, is to write down actually what matters to you. This isn't your goals for the future. This isn't what success I want to achieve in life, my 5-year plan. It's more about fundamentally, who we are, what we stand for, what matters to us. Because if we can identify that and be more able to, um, be with that part of ourselves, then we can decide and choose, okay, what am I doing already that fits with my values, that shows that I'm doing what matters to me, that has an impact or is recognized already in the world around me. So take some time. In the first workbook, there was some work around that of really looking at the bigger picture. It was like a target with all these different areas in your life that you can start to sort of pay attention to. What is it that matters in my life already? Which areas in my life are important to me? So it can be things like not only sort of work goals or work sort of elements. It can be things like, how I sort of am involved in community activities, what matters to you about being somebody who takes care of others or thinks about other people, what matters to me about growing sort of and developing in myself, that I'm somebody who sort of nurtures curiosity. It could be something that, how I care for animals or pay attention to and am empathetic to other people's needs. So have a think about that for yourself. I do encourage you to do that because I work with people one-to-one, and that's often what we work on to begin with, even before any sort of big goals that people have, because it's part of who you are and part of your identity. Then the second tip that I sort of recommend is, when we tell ourselves this message, I'm not very confident or competent in this area, and we give ourselves a message and we're comparing ourselves to people, but we see they're better than me at that. They can do all these things. I can't do anything. We are really undermining what already is there, the building blocks that we can work on. So notice what you're already doing well, what already gives you a sense of confidence or competence, those areas of skill. And if you sort of are feeling a bit, well, I don't know, I haven't got anything, start small, like, how do I, cook? Are there things that I know I'm confident in, competent in? How do I, contact with friends? What do I notice about that? So things like that, small things that you can build on. And then each day for a week, keep a journal. And this final bit is a very interesting one, and people talk about journaling and talk about gratitude. And there's been quite a lot of studies now that are recognizing that the act of writing things down and paying attention to what you're already doing well can start to build in that sense of acknowledgement and acceptance of those areas within you. If you are just thinking those things and it just goes by the by, we're less likely to pay attention to it and remember it. Because this is about how do we remember the day that's been. And if we're focused on the things that went wrong, then that's what we remember rather than the 10 things that went well and one thing that went wrong. If you're writing those 10 things down, it helps to readdress and balance that area. And the other part is that what am I grateful for? So it's that sense of energy that we can bring to how we are showing up and how we are acknowledging the things already that are going well, however small. And when people are really depressed, what I notice is that it's a real struggle for people. But once you start, it becomes easier to find those things and build on them. So if that's something that you've never done and it feels really uncomfortable, start with 3 things for the day, but build it up to about 10, because we can all find 10 things if we sit down and think about it and write them down. And they can be the same things day after day, and they can be different things. But it's about that positive psychology. When we are more in tune with those things, we're more likely to see more of them around us. So that little area within us starts to grow, and we start to notice more, and it starts to feel more comfortable recognizing things that you're doing well, that you're grateful for. It becomes easier. It's like any habit. It's like going to the gym and doing, presses on the machines. The first few times it doesn't feel good. You're not doing many of them, but the more you go, the more you try, the easier it gets. So this is like anything. It's a skill to practice. So the more you do it, the better you get at it. Talks. So embracing continuous learning. Now, this is something that is very common, that feeling of fraud. And again, it's that inner critical voice, that feeling that you're going to make a mistake. So part of it is that fear of making a mistake, that means something about you, your expectations, you're not matching what you were hoping for if you're a perfectionist, or if you're somebody who is used to getting things right straight away and then suddenly you don't. You can have this feeling and fear that other people are going to have the same view as yourself, and they're going to be judging you and seeing you as being less of a person, maybe, or of letting them down, disappointing them in some way. Now, we touched on before that often some of these feelings can come from earlier experiences when our worth is tied up to the outcome, particularly when we are really fearful of making a mistake. It's often a way that we've been experiencing situations as we've grown up, or that our caregivers or people around us are expecting more from us. So once you step back and you recognize that the biggest fear, what is it? And it feels like it's, if I make a mistake, then I'm failing, or if I make a mistake, other people are going to see that and think less of me. Then you need to maybe think about, what does it mean to fail? How bad is it going to be? Again, going back to that ABC thought record that we were using, and what's the worst that can happen? What's the best that can happen in this situation when I make a mistake? And what's more realistic? What's more helpful in this way? How can I look at this in a way that's the way that I would talk to other people? Would I tell a child that if you make a mistake, that's it, you're diminished, your value, your worth is less? Or would you say to a child, we need to practice, you need to keep trying, because by doing that, you learn more and you're learning the skills that you need over time. Think about learning an instrument. I was actually talking to somebody yesterday who's struggling with this exact same problem. And he plays guitar. And I said to him, well, and he said at work, he said, if I've been given a task, I expect myself to do it and do it well and do it right. Why shouldn't I? That's what I expect myself to be able to do. And I said, well, when you play guitar and you're learning a new piece, do you expect yourself, once you've gone through it once, to get it right the whole way through continuously? He said, well, no. I said, well, that's exactly the same thing. So what is it that you say to yourself that's different when you're learning an instrument than you do when you're in a work task base? And it's about trying to see every new work opportunity as, I'm growing my knowledge and skills. The second tip regarding this is to look to yourself, like in the last one, of what are the challenges of this new thing that I'm doing, and rather than the outcome being I need other people to see what I've done and that tells me I've done it well enough, but look into yourself to focus on what is it about this new task that is going to be a challenge? What did I need to learn? How am I going to improve by doing it? And seeing as you go along what you're doing and how you're doing it. So the meaning and the purpose of the learning of that task becomes more about what you're doing and how you're growing, again, rather than the approval from others at the end. The part of that will help you is giving yourself praise at the end. So however hard that task was, it wasn't easy, but how can I acknowledge that I've done that and that wasn't easy and I didn't know whether I could do it or not, and look what I've managed to achieve. So even if other people give you approval, you have to be thinking about how you are giving yourself that acknowledgement, that praise, that sense of approval as well. And the third part of this is looking at how other people maybe deal with success and how they deal with making mistakes. Maybe share or ask other people what their experiences are of this. How do they deal with things that don't go so well? Be curious. Start to recognize that other people maybe experience similar things to yourself, or maybe have a different way of tackling it too. And it's all interesting. There's no complete right way. There's no complete wrong way. It's more about we all do things differently and see things differently. So instead of seeing failure as a confirmation of your inadequacy, how do you attend to when other people don't do things so well? How do you tell or speak to them about it? If a friend comes to you and said, oh, I failed my driving test, do you say, well, that means you're an inadequate person? Or would you say, well, okay, so some things went wrong on the day. Doesn't mean you're an inadequate person, doesn't mean you're a bad person, but you can certainly, see the areas that you need to try again and take it again. So how you speak to other people about their experiences and how you recognize how other people experience things and what they do and how they manage things can help you tune into a different way of thinking about things. And it's something that happens over time. It's not magic suddenly overnight, but it does start to shift. Once you start to see the problem is not the mistake, the problem is the way I think about the mistake, then you're on the path to making changes that are going to help you and help you build and grow. Final bonus tip. I really do recommend writing things down. In the workbook in the third part, I've given you sort of an example of maybe a sheet you can use, which puts everything down on one page, like what your intentions are for the day, what your mood is, what's gone well, what you're grateful for, and maybe even sometimes we do sort of affirmations that can be sort of helpful, so that we're going into something with a more positive mindset. So journaling is really helpful. It's also really helpful utilizing those worksheets from the previous times, just to notice where that critical voice turns up, what the trigger point might be for it, how it's influencing what you're doing, and how can I make changes in that. So all of those things are really good. The writing down, so helpful. Share with other people. Like you've come today and learning, well, it's not just me, there are other people that this happens to. And, I was looking at the lady who's the head of Facebook at the moment, and she recognizes that she can sometimes suffer from imposter syndrome. There's all sorts of people you wouldn't realize it comes in from time to time. I myself, I know I've suffered from it in the past. It's been an experience I've definitely had in public speaking. It's still not easy for me, but certainly I don't worry about what people think about me in the same way that I did at one point. So share your feelings, because that can really help, certainly with mentors, colleagues, people that you're relating to in work, because that can help break down that experience for you and realize that, you can do something about it and get feedback from others about the areas that actually you're doing really well in already and where improvement can happen. So I do recommend that, even though it might feel uncomfortable to do that. Now, last time I sort of asked people to set a target for the week ahead, and I'm going to ask people to maybe think about doing that again from today's session, just as a way of setting that intention up, giving yourself a small goal to do from this session that might help you to move forward just in one small way. That's all I sort of encourage people to think about, not big things to change, but one thing you could do differently. And it may be, okay, I'm going to maybe journal things that I've got skills in already, or it might be I'm going to look at my values or what matters to me, or I'm going to practice the breathing every day. So think about what you're going to do differently and how that might affect or change or challenge an unhelpful thinking style. So if we take something like, I'm going to practice my breathing every day, you might have a thinking style that says, oh, well, you won't stick at that. You never stick at things. You're going to fail at that too. And that might be that, well, if I don't do it one day, then I can't do it because that means I'm not good enough. I'm not able to even do something as small as that. So that would be the unhelpful thinking style of all or nothing, or catastrophizing, that not doing it one day means I'm an awful person. So when you're recognizing that, what might be an alternative thought that I can put in place that will be more helpful, encouraging, and supporting towards me? What steps do I need to do this task, this target? So it might be putting a reminder on my phone, or sort of saying to my partner or friend, right, let's do it at a certain time when we get into work, let's do it then. And what support might I need? Well, for that, there might not be that much support. It might just be the technology of putting it in as a diary, but it's thinking about those things. How am I going to make this easy for myself? And something that I can intentionally say I'm going to do, that I follow through on. Because in the end, that's something. Imposter syndrome isn't the same as self-esteem or our self-worth, but they often are tied together. So our confidence can feel very much lower when we are struggling with our comparison with others, and we are giving ourselves a message that we are not as good as other people. So support you might need might be around encouraging yourself or putting things in place more consistently, and proving to yourself that you can trust yourself to do these things. It does make a difference. Okay, so we're coming into sort of the summary of, moving us around here so we can see the screen, of what we've been looking at, in terms of imposter syndrome. So in the first session, it was really understanding the different ways that imposter syndrome can turn up. The experience that people have might be more of one style of imposter syndrome than another's. So for some people, it's more that perfectionism, that needing to get everything right to meet standards or else, feeling like you're a fraud, that other people are going to judge you. Or it might be that if I don't do everything for everyone else, then I'm letting others down, and then I'm going to be seen as again, a fraud, not good enough. Or one of the other ones, like always needing to do things first time well enough or else. So the past influences how we maybe experience imposter syndrome. So there's different ways it can show up. And recognizing that, understanding that although that's been the script, that's how I've experienced myself, and maybe I've placed too much value on certain elements, like what other people think, or getting to a certain level of success, it doesn't mean it's stuck in that way. That is how it has been, but it doesn't always have to be like that. So when we are noticing that doubt, that criticism, the fear of failure or judgment, then it might be showing up and we are aware of it now. And there might be certain triggers, so being aware of those. But what we were looking at in session 1 to 2, particularly in session 2, was how do we balance out that critical thinking, that criticism, the doubt, the way we are constructing success and failure, and challenging that thinking, trying new things, seeking advice more easily, setting realistic expectations. So in the present, making those changes. So the here and now work that I've been sharing with you today enables you to be more able to be present to what those thoughts are, what actions and old habits I'm falling back into, and how do I feel that stress, that tension, or that demoralization. So wherever you notice that, the strong feelings, that's when you can start to make changes. And looking into the future, so from this present, then it's influencing your view of the future. So, how can this work help and enable you to build a sense of value within yourself, build a sense of self worth that's not dependent on how other people value you? It's your own self worth, about what you think and see for yourself. So the future starts to change, and your opportunities or what you believe in yourself can alter too. So start thinking about, well, if I am making these changes, what do I want for the future? What's going to change for me moving forward? What is it that I'm aiming for from making a change to that critical voice, turning the volume down? Maybe being more involved with colleagues, being more involved in teamwork activities, accepting more social engagements, going for new things, not taking it all on yourself, delegating effectively. So all of those things will have such an impact not only on your workplace, but also obviously your confidence, but outside of work, having a bit more of a work-life balance and less likely to go into a burnout situation, which can happen when we are really struggling with imposter syndrome. And often I see people in my practice that have got to that stage where it's really got to burnout, where they're so depleted with energy, so overwhelmed with the workload because they've taken it all on because of fear of being found out, that they just cannot go on and get to that point of having to stop. So if you can work on this now, then that's not going to be the future. It's going to be something different. So that's why it's good you've turned up. So looking to the future then, the emphasis on maybe making some changes. That's what I want from today. So look at the workbook. I'll put this recording up on YouTube again so you can listen back if you feel you want to just go over things again. Thinking about a journal to build your focus on what you do well. That's what I encourage. And I'd also encourage you to give me some feedback. I did email out to those people who've been before, a form to give some feedback. I really welcome that. It's really, really helpful for me. So I will email everyone after this session again today just to see if anyone would be willing to give me some feedback, because I do really want that. It'll be great. And then post any questions in the Facebook group, or you can email me. So my email is info@kerrydubbertherapy.co.uk. So they're the testimonials. I do appreciate them. They do help me a lot, which is great. So any questions? I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to stop recording.